Hey, Composing Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we're going to be talking about Flux. Now, if you're wondering what Flux is, maybe you've been like, I've never heard of this Flux thing. It's sort of a term I made up. I read it somewhere, and it's very useful in sound design, and I've been sort of really surprised at how useful this as an idea has become in my mixing. Flux just means continuous change. You see, whenever you're trying to resynthesize a sound that you hear, such as like footsteps, for example, or just like you throwing a baseball to your friend who catches it, and just trying to recreate the sound of the ball as if you were there, like going through the air and being caught, that sound never stays the same from 1 millisecond to the next. It's constantly changing. So if you're trying to resynthesize it, they're really hard to resynthesize, far, far easier to record. So when I spin, I literally do. I spend time trying to synthesize like footsteps. Like I tried doing a guy running on a beach once, and I got kind of close. I was looking at all sorts of waveforms and spectrums and just trying to do the best I possibly could. And so here, when mixing, it's the same way when you record things. Also, if you're using sample-based material, those sounds are real complicated sounds. The complex waveforms, they never quite stay the same. So your processing should really change and morph with them. And you should be altering them as you go. Now the number one way you do that is you sort of get a timbre you like. But if you're dealing with something like this guitar here, various things are changing. So I have various EQs that come on and off. I have my guitar, now maybe not on the guitar itself, but I have EQs that come on and off. I have volume changes that go on so let's just listen to the guitar and then we'll contrast it against the sound that doesn't have nearly as much flux. So all that woo sound is literally just the guitar. I had someone come over and they just had pedals galore and they're sitting there pushing all these pedals and all making all this noise, and it was really cool. So we took that, but this sound over here, now warning, this is pretty loud. This sound has a lot less flux. But I have to account that other things like the vocals, for example, are going to have much more flux. So in order to deal with this, I'm just bringing your attention to the fact that you're going to be changing things as you go. So for example, there are different filter movements that follow. See, vocal filter, and then you can see it moving on and off. It changes for each part. It doesn't repeat. It does different things because of the flux that's going on in the sound. And just understanding that things are going to change. They're not going to stay consistent. Like this thing, for example, I add flux by doing these filter moves. I account for it because of what other things may be doing. Understanding that this is a dynamic, moving puzzle. Nothing stays quite the same. As a result, I've developed a mixing workflow that works a little bit different than what I used to do. You know, before they sort of say you find a sweet spot and then you use this sweet spot. It's totally true. There is a sweet spot. What people don't often tell you, it's a moving target. This sweet spot does not stay still. It freaking moves around, and it can be really hard to track down where the sweet spot is at different times. So I often mix in sections. I often start with the loudest part of a track, and I know that this flux thing is going to change things. So I'll automate things specifically for this one spot. But over here, I may do something different. I may have something that sounds like, oh, this needs to change. Like, for example, the noise thing here. I change what goes on there because there's different things going on in the track. This can happen. Now you might be going, well, you could say that about anything. You could say the arrangement of the track itself has flux. You could say all these things. You can really blow this principle up to pretty much anything. And having just the right amount of flux in a sound is important to maintain interest. But if one's flux is getting in the way, if it's fluxing in a way that's getting in the way of something else, and that's not so great. You want to change it. You want to take something that normally sits still, like an EQ, and cause it to change to match the flux that's going on here to get the thing that you want. So I use this flux term a lot, as you can see. Mostly in sound design, very useful because it allows me to very clearly identify with like an actual term, hey, I'm trying to match the flux of this sound. Because you could get really specific with that flux. You could say, oh, it's the EQ movement. It's a filter movement, which are sort of the same thing. It's the reverb changing on and off. Maybe the reverb, you do something weird with the reverb. Maybe you have a delay going that's doing something. Maybe the sound itself, it's a real, like a sample-based sound. So that can be really typically hard to reproduce, as we talked about earlier. So just understanding that these things change. Like you can see the guitar volumes changing throughout the whole thing. Changes over here again. And this one changes quite dramatically. And it's important the way you get it's important the way the guitar feels its role at the end as it comes out. So the vocals, again, now this thing does repeat, so I can actually take the same thing, and I already know the processing. It's going to sound pretty good, but maybe I do other things in the track that I want to change what's happening here. You see, I've got like various things I'm trying to add in interest in Flux. And over here, this guy is great by itself. Like, this is the drop. So I deliberately turn off dynamic EQ in just a regular EQ, and then I turn them on to the degree they are necessary over here so that they can make room for everything else that is going on, because there's a lot more that happens right here, and some of these things are changing, so you make changing processing. So that's pretty much that. It's just a real quick bringing to your attention the term of Flux and how I use it. Over here at the beginning, you can see that I have some cool metallic sounds, and instead of just letting them be their already complicated selves, I decided it'd be cool to mess with an EQ and move the bands of the EQ around. So this is more of a sound design move than anything, but just interesting things like that. So if you find this useful, let me know. Drop it in the comments. Subscribe. I'm wearing a hat, and have a blessed day.